All right, ready to dive into some dense, maybe even a little bit scandalous history of the CIA and FBI.
Oh, absolutely. Always up for a little scandal, especially when it comes to J. Michael Waller. The man knows how to tell a story.
He sure does. And his book, NW Big Intel, is no exception. He had some questions about it. Waller's take on how the agencies went from these Cold War heroes to, well, something else entirely.
Yeah, there's that whole from Cold War heroes to
Yeah.
thing in the title. Leaves you kind of hanging, doesn't it?
A little bit, right. So let's unpack it. What's Waller's main argument here? What's he trying to show us?
Well, he throws us right into early 20th century New York City. Imagine it's 1917, pre-CIA, pre-FBI as we even know it, and a young Leon Trotsky is already there, plotting, scheming.
Wait, plotting what? Against the U.S.?
Undermining the U.S. government, that was the goal. Waller uses Trotsky's presence to make a point about just how vulnerable the U.S. was back then to foreign agents.
That's wild. No FBI around to, keep an eye on things. I mean, I know they weren't always around, but still.
Right. It makes you think about how intelligence gathering even worked back then. It was this Wild West. And that vulnerability, according to Waller, is key to understanding why the FBI, as we know it, even emerged in the first place.
Okay, so that brings us to, the legend himself, J. Edgar Hoover.
The man, the myth, the incredibly polarizing figure. Waller doesn't shy away from any of it.
So how does he portray Hoover? Hero, villain, something in between?
He goes deep on Hoover's early years. Waller wants us to understand the context. The rise of communism, the Red Scare, the very real fear of revolution at home. This wasn't just theoretical for Hoover, it was personal.
In what way?
Well, he was deeply affected by witnessing anarchist bombings, German sabotage attempts during World War I. Waller paints this picture of Hoover as someone who'd seen firsthand the chaos and destruction these ideologies could unleash.
So for him, it wasn't just an abstract threat, it was a very real danger.
Exactly, it shaped his whole worldview. And it's this fear, this unwavering belief that these ideologies posed an existential threat to America that drove his approach to leading the FBI.
But, I mean, wasn't there also this tension, right? This constant push and pull between wanting to keep the country safe, but also upholding civil liberties.
Yeah, and Waller doesn't shy away from that either. He brings up all the criticisms leveled at Hoover, the surveillance, the targeting of activists, the overreach. He portrays Hoover as this incredibly complex figure, driven by a desire to protect America, but also prone to crossing lines in the name of security.
Okay, it's getting interesting. So we have Hoover, laser-focused on internal threats, on these grand ideological battles, but then Waller contrasts him with Wild Bill Gonvin, right, the OSS founder.
Yeah.
Two totally different personalities by the sounds of it.
Night and day. Waller uses them to highlight these totally different approaches to intelligence gathering. Donovan was all about risk-taking, unconventional methods. He saw value in unconventional recruits, even communists.
Wait, seriously?
Yeah.
He was willing to work with communists, especially with Hoover already waving the red flag.
He was. Donovan, at least as Waller describes him, saw the bigger picture. He recognized that communists, for all their ideological baggage, had experience with infiltration, with operating in the shadows, skills that could be useful against the Nazis.
That's a tough sell, even back then.
Yeah.
Did that cause friction between them? Between Hoover and Donovan, I mean?
You better believe it. Waller suggests that this difference in approach, this "the enemy of my enemy is my friend" idea that Donovan embraced, it rubbed Hoover the wrong way. He saw it as short-sighted, potentially even dangerous in the long run.
I mean, it does seem to contradict this whole idea of communism being this big, looming threat, right? If you're willing to work with them when it suits you.
Exactly. It's a fascinating dynamic, and I think Waller uses it to set the stage for some of the ideological clashes he digs into later on.
Okay, so we've got the groundwork. Hoover, the staunch anti-communist, versus Donovan, the pragmatic strategist. What happens next? Where does Waller take us from here?
Well, he throws us another curveball. He brings up a story about a cryptonym. Captain Luke.
A cryptonym? Like a code name.
Exactly. And this isn't just any code name. This one was given to Waller himself by CIA Director Bill Casey while he was working undercover in Central America.
Wait, Waller was undercover for the CIA?
Oh yeah, he's got stories. But this one, the Captain Luke story, it's more than just a cool spy anecdote for Waller. It's about how Casey operated, how he viewed intelligence gathering.
Okay, I'm hooked. How does this cryptonym story connect to everything else?
Waller argues that Casey, shaped by his experiences in World War II, deeply distrusted bureaucracy, felt that it hindered intelligence gathering. He preferred to work outside official channels, rely on trusted individuals, and sometimes that meant keeping things off the books, even from within the CIA itself.
That's intense. So even within the agency, there were these different camps, different ideas about how to get things done.
Absolutely. And that's what makes Waller's perspective so interesting. He's not just giving us a dry history, he's showing us how these agencies were shaped by personalities, by competing views, and how those tensions would continue to play out in the years to come.
And those tensions, I have a feeling they only get more complicated as we move into the post-Cold War era. Am I right?
Oh, you have no idea.
So the Cold War ends and the CIA and FBI, they get bigger, more bureaucratic. Seems kind of natural, right? New world, new threats, you need more resources, more manpower, all that. But Waller, he sees that as just the beginning, doesn't he?
Oh yeah, for him that's just the tip of the iceberg. He argues that the real shift, the one that really matters, was ideological. He sees this rise of something called critical theory and its impact on the culture inside these agencies as something, well, something you can't ignore.
Critical theory, okay, I gotta admit, that one's new to me.
Yeah.
What exactly is that in this context, and how does Waller connect it to, the CIA and FBI today?
So Waller, he takes us back to the 1930s, to this group of Marxist intellectuals called the Frankfurt School. They fled Nazi Germany, ended up influencing academic thought in the US. They were concerned with power structures, with how those structures perpetuate oppression and inequality.
Okay, but we're talking about academics here, philosophers even. And Waller's drawing a line between them and what, spies? How does that even work?
He makes that connection through the modern idea of identity politics. He argues there is a straight line from the Frankfurt School's ideas to this big focus on group identity over individual identity that he sees everywhere today. And he's saying that focus has seeped into the CIA and FBI, actually impacting how they operate.
Okay, it's a pretty bold claim. Is he saying these agencies were, infiltrated or something?
Not quite. He points to the Obama administration as a turning point, a moment where things really shifted. Waller argues that Obama's own personal history, his ideological leanings, which he believes were influenced by figures like Angela Davis.
Angela Davis, the activist.
Yeah, a prominent communist activist. And Bill Ayers, another controversial figure linked to some radical groups in the 60s. Waller says these figures shaped Obama's worldview, which in turn shaped his approach to governing. And that included intelligence.
It almost sounds like he's saying Obama deliberately reshaped the intelligence community based on his own ideology. That's a hefty accusation.
It definitely is. But Waller does back it up. He points to specific actions during Obama's presidency, like Executive Order 13583, which was all about diversity and inclusion in the federal workforce. He argues this wasn't just about being fair, it was about changing the culture inside these agencies, putting identity above merit, even discouraging people from speaking up if they disagreed.
So not infiltration, but more like a top-down push to change things from within. Interesting. He even brings to that whole Hunter Biden laptop situation, right? What's the connection there?
Exactly. Waller uses that whole situation as a prime example of what he's talking about. This idea that ideological bias, politicization, it's all seeped into these agencies. He argues that the way the intelligence community handled the Hunter Biden laptop story, a story that he believes could really hurt Biden's campaign.
But it did get a lot of attention, didn't it? Right before the election and everything.
Yeah, but Waller says it was suppressed, downplayed, and he uses that letter, the one signed by all those former intelligence officials, dismissing the laptop as Russian disinformation as evidence.
Oh, right. But wasn't that letter contradicted later on?
By the FBI director himself, in his own testimony. And that's what Waller's pointing to, this discrepancy. It's like, which is it? Were they wrong then, or are they hiding something now? Waller argues that it shows how the intelligence community was more worried about protecting Biden than about uncovering the truth, even if it meant burying potentially important information.
Wow, I don't even know what to say to that. So, to be clear, Waller's arguing that these agencies, instead of protecting us, are basically playing politics.
That's the heart of his argument. And he doesn't just stop there. He goes even deeper, pointing to examples inside the agencies themselves to show just how much this supposed cultural shift has taken hold.
Like what? What kind of examples are we talking about here?
Oh, he gets into the weeds. He talks about these mandatory diversity summits they have now, super detailed guides on pronoun usage for employees, even social media posts from CIA officers expressing overtly political opinions. It's like, can you imagine that even being a thing a few decades ago?
I mean, yeah, times have changed, but is that really such a bad thing? A little sensitivity training? never hurt anyone, right?
Waller's not against diversity and inclusion. He's just saying that in these cases, it goes way beyond that. He says it's not just about fostering respect. It's about pushing a specific agenda. And if you don't get on board, you're the problem.
So it's not about creating a welcoming environment. It's about enforcing a specific way of thinking. That's concerning, if true. Does he have any evidence to back that up, or is this just, like, his opinion?
No, he backs it up with details from the training materials, stuff he's seen firsthand. He even mentions that Christopher Wray, the current FBI director, had to withdraw a mandatory diversity course because agents were refusing to do it.
Wow, seriously. Talk about pushing back. Okay, so we have the critiques, the examples, the whole shebang. But where does Waller go from here? What's the solution?
And this is where things get really interesting. Remember how we talked about the agencies getting bigger after the Cold War? Well, Waller, he doesn't just want to trim the fat, he wants to blow the whole thing up.
Blow it up, like get rid of the CIA and FBI.
He's talking about dismantling and rebuilding both agencies from scratch, completely starting over.
Dismantling and rebuilding the CIA and FBI, wow, that's a pretty big ask. Is he talking about completely wiping the slate clean, starting from zero?
Pretty much. Waller argues that the problems he's laid out, the politicization, this ideological shift, they're not just surface-level issues. He sees them as so deeply ingrained that anything less than a complete overhaul just won't cut it.
Okay, but how do you even begin to dismantle institutions like that? I mean, we're talking about the CIA and FBI. These are massive, powerful organizations. It seems almost impossible.
It would be a huge undertaking, no doubt. But Waller, he's got a plan, or at least a framework for how he thinks it could work.
All right, lay it on me. What does dismantling and rebuilding the CIA and FBI actually look like in Waller's view?
Well, for starters, he stresses this need to really separate law enforcement from intelligence gathering. He's very critical of the FBI's current structure, the fact that they're both a domestic intelligence agency, A&E, a criminal investigative body. He thinks that creates conflicts of interest.
So what, create a whole separate agency just for intelligence?
Exactly. One that's focused solely on external threats, terrorism, espionage, that sort of thing. And this new agency, in Waller's view, it wouldn't just be a rebranded FBI. He sees it as leaner, more agile, able to adapt quickly to new challenges.
And the FBI would just handle, what, domestic law enforcement? Like the stuff we usually associate them with?
Right. Waller argues that by separating those functions, you'd make both agencies more effective. The FT could focus on being the best darn law enforcement agency in the world, while the new intelligence agency could dedicate itself to navigating the murky world of global threats.
Interesting. But we're still talking about a huge GE bureaucratic shakeup. Does Waller really think that's feasible?
He does, and he argues that the potential benefits outweigh the challenges. For him, it's about restoring credibility, ensuring that these agencies are truly equipped for the future. He believes that a complete restructuring, as radical as it sounds, is the only way to really achieve that.
It's definitely a bold vision. Whether it's the right one, well, that's a whole other conversation.
Exactly, and that's what makes Waller's book so thought-provoking. He's not afraid to ask the tough questions, to challenge the status quo. He wants us to really grapple with these ideas, to have a serious conversation about what we want from our intelligence agencies in the 21st century.
He's definitely given us a lot to think about. So as we wrap up, what are your final thoughts? What do you hope our listeners take away from this deep dive into a new WGIing intel?
Well, I hope they come away with a sense of just how complex, how nuanced these issues really are. Waller's book, it's a starting point, not the final word. There are multiple perspectives on these issues, and it's crucial to engage with them all critically.
Couldn't agree more. Waller makes some strong claims, backs them up with compelling evidence, and whether you agree with him or not, it's hard to deny that he raises some crucial questions about the future of American intelligence.
Absolutely. He wants us to be informed, to be engaged, to hold our institutions accountable, and that's something we can all get behind.
Well said. This has been an eye-opening look at the CIA and FBI, their transformation, and the challenges they face in a changing world. Thanks for joining us for another deep dive.
My pleasure.